Hi everybody, my name is Sapphire. I'm an engineer with a consultancy called EngineerBetter. Thank you for coming to this session. You could be anywhere in the world right now, but you're right here with me and I'm eternally grateful for that. As part of my role with EngineerBetter, something I find myself doing a lot is helping people learn the ins and outs of Cloud Foundry, whether that's what Cloud Foundry is, details about the components that deploy Cloud Foundry, and different deployment mechanisms like concourse, for instance. As a result, I spend a lot of time thinking about the most effective ways of helping people learn about these components without being intimidated by the sheer scope of things they need to learn. I think about helping people stay engaged in the learning process and continuing to believe that they can utilize this learning going forward. It's not uncommon for companies to struggle to find people who have all of the skills and experience using all of the technologies that are required to maintain their Cloud Foundry environments. And as a result, being willing to train new starters and doing it effectively is crucial. Additionally, beyond having knowledge of these technologies, team members truly come into their own when they're able to experiment and infuse their teams with innovative new approaches to looking after their platforms and technologies. The scope of what a team maintaining Cloud Foundry environments needs to know varies from team to team. And one important area that all teams will have to cover at some point is what Cloud Foundry is and how that particular team is deploying it. For teams using Bosch deployed Cloud Foundry, this would include what exactly Bosch is, easier said than done, and its role in deploying and managing the lifecycle of different deployments. Many teams might create their own Bosch releases, and that has its own very steep learning curve. Similarly, some teams will be taking a Kubernetes approach, so it will be essential for team members to know exactly how Kubernetes works and how that relates to the Cloud Foundry environments that they're looking after. And additionally, concourse is often used as a means of deploying and maintaining these foundations. So it's a lot to learn. It can be intimidating, especially if someone is being exposed to all of these technologies for the very first time. So how do we help people get to a point at which they're comfortable with all of these technologies and in a position where they feel that they can deliver value to their team? The concept of self-efficacy is one that's existed for a while, and at its most basic level, it refers to whether someone thinks they're able to do a particular task successfully. Say they need to deploy a fresh Cloud Foundry environment. If their first thought is that it's rather trivial, they could do it without much effort, we'd say that they have high self-efficacy. But if they're immediately terrified by the thought, they're not sure where to start, and it's something they don't think they could do because what is Cloud Foundry? We'd say that they have low self-efficacy. Some researchers have made broad distinctions between those who have self-efficacy and those who don't, but in fact, it's a malleable trait that can be influenced. So if you ever come across any experts talking about hiring people with high self-efficacy or training people with high self-efficacy, ignore them completely. The most influential source about self-efficacy for a given task is performance on the same task or given task previously. Past successes enhance someone's expectation of their own mastery, whereas failures, particularly repeated ones, lower these mastery expectations. If someone regularly makes Cloud Foundry deployments, and more often than not they occur without issue, they're more inclined to think that they could continue doing that going forward, and it would positively contribute to their self-efficacy. Whereas if someone had never deployed a Cloud Foundry before, or every time they tried it had been marred with issues, the opposite would be true. Another contributing source is vicarious experience. This refers not to the behavior of the individual, but they're observing the behavior of others. Seeing other people perform tasks successfully makes the individual think that they too could do the same. So if other team members are continuously deploying and maintaining their platforms, new starters are more inclined to think that they could do the same thing going forward. How someone feels at a given time can have a high impact on their evaluation of their own competency. Even if they're doing something they've done before, if someone is stressed or tense or agitated, it might lower their expectation that they'll be able to successfully do something another time. And a lot of the time, someone's thoughts about their own performance don't quite match up to reality. And in these circumstances, they benefit from others helping them realize their potential. Although it can be limited in its effectiveness, when appraisals are realistic, they can contribute to successful performance. So how can we realistically boost the self-efficacy of those entering the world of Cloud Foundry for the first time? There are many cases for throwing someone in at the deep end, but I'd argue that this isn't necessarily one of them. I say to carve out time for learning and give new team members the opportunity to dedicate time to learning about the platforms they'll eventually be maintaining and the technologies they'll need to be confident in. This helps make the very act of doing their jobs a lot less daunting. A lot of new starters don't necessarily know what they don't know and need some guidance on where to focus their attention and how best to proceed. At EngineerBetter, we have an ordered backlog of materials for new starters to work through, gradually increasing in difficulty, and it helps everyone develop a foundational understanding of components like Cloud Foundry, Bosch, and Concourse. So let's look back at those factors that contribute to developing self-efficacy. If someone's just started and they're not coming from a team that does anything like what the platform team does, there are many things that they'll be doing that won't be reflected in their past performance. But at a foundational level, it's likely that some things will, even if it is just using a command line interface. Begin with low-level skills and progress to things that are more complex. In the world of Cloud Foundry, you can start with one of the most basic but crucial components, pushing an application. The act of pushing an app to Cloud Foundry is simple, but it's immediately rewarding. Make this success, pushing an app, the past performance that then informs the next work that people will be working on. And if they can push an application, they're ready to create services and so on. Similarly, if someone's getting started with Concourse, if they've reached a stage where they can create a job in Concourse, the possibilities are endless. So if you can ensure that the progression and increases in difficulty in the work that new starters are working on is reasonable and achievable, their past performance will always be a positive contributor. Keeping new team members abreast of the work of existing team members will help them remain aware of what they too could be achieving eventually. The more similar the team member for comparison, the better. So being exposed to the work of other recent new starters is a bigger self-efficacy boost than those of team members who've been on the team for a longer period of time. There's only so much that can be done to moderate the emotions of other people, and for the most part, if you're on someone's team or you're managing them, the only thing you really have control over is potentially the environment they're working within. And this partly relates to the first point that I raised, which is carving out time for people to do the foundational learning. If there are additional pressures, like pressure to learn everything within a very fixed period of time, this can be detrimental to the learning of new team members and cause problems further down the line. Verbal persuasion is more than just saying, you can do it. For comments to actually be impactful, attention needs to be paid to both the source of the feedback and how realistic it is. Unless the person delivering feedback is viewed as credible and competent, it will be viewed as meaningless. So people who have an understanding of exactly what new learners need to know and are learning, and who are also invested in what they're learning, are the best people to facilitate verbal persuasion. And on a platform team, this would be fellow team members or managers with a technical understanding of what new starters are learning. Additionally, the feedback provided needs to be realistic and appropriate. Flippant, off-the-cuff motivational talk isn't very useful because it doesn't really give anyone anything to work with, and it does very little to boost someone's self-efficacy. And unrealistic feedback can be misleading and eventually result in failure, and that in turn lowers someone's self-efficacy. Saying, for instance, if you can do a CF push, you can create a Bosch release, is deceptive if you don't acknowledge that there is a world of things that need to be explored between those two steps. High self-efficacy continues to be beneficial beyond initial learning. within a team. And as we know, learning within technical roles never really ends. In Cloud Foundry alone, there are continuously new features being introduced which have their own learning curves. So being able to continually learn is crucial for those on Cloud Foundry platform teams. Some researchers have looked into how self-efficacy impacts the continued learning of high school teachers at a school in Flanders, using a measure called the Teacher's Sense of Efficacy Scale. This was a measure of self-efficacy as it relates to the task that teachers do and was specific to school environments. They measured self-efficacy as well as continued involvement in continued learning. They found that teachers who had the highest self-efficacy were more likely to take part in these continued learning activities. So this gives us reason to believe that boosting self-efficacy does a lot to encourage people to continue boosting their workplace relevant skills. The next learning tool I wanted to look at is play. It's easy to assume that play has no place in the workplace. Work is a place for serious business, and the infrastructure that underpins a lot of very important applications probably isn't the best playground for new starters. When I talk about play, I'm referring to the act of engaging in an activity for non-serious reasons that can be distinguished in some way from the real world. But how does this relate to helping new people grasp the complexities of Cloud Foundry and gain confidence as members of their team, to quote my abstract? A given team might maintain concourse environments with a lot of responsibilities, including downloading resources, creating BOSH releases, building Docker images, and deploying a platform that utilizes the resources, BOSH releases, and Docker images produced by the other pipelines. And then there's the platform itself, a platform that deploys hundreds or thousands of very important applications. It's safe to say that you wouldn't want new starters to experiment with or learn what Cloud Foundry is within these environments. It's also quite likely that knowing the importance of these environments, your new starters don't want to experiment with them either. What they need is their own playground, their own environment separate from the real worlds of the very important applications and pipelines. Giving new starters the space to play equips them with a risk-free arena to develop domain-relevant skills. In environments that are similar to the real world that they'll later be working within, they're given the opportunity to develop skills they'll be later utilizing without the cognitive load of potentially breaking a mission-critical system. Errors are particularly useful in learning about how a system works, but you don't want to see them in your production environments or even the development environments that people are using to test out features they'll later be using in production. One error message can provide helpful information about how a given component relates to another and the language that component was written in. With the information that errors provide, they pave the way for further investigation, allowing learners to explore more and discover and develop a more nuanced understanding of how these Cloud Foundry components work. Additionally, in these play environments, people are less scared of making mistakes and less inclined to disregard errors as anomalies. Play also has a positive impact on intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation refers to the motivation to engage in a task for the sake of it, due to an interest or enjoyment, as opposed to being a means of getting a reward or avoiding punishment. Conversely, extrinsic motivation stems from something external, be it goals set out by someone else or praise or reward. In an experiment in the 90s, MBA students had to participate in a task where they were either production managers performing a learning company exercise or starship captains playing the Word Blaster game. The task was exactly the same across both conditions, it was just the name that differed. When the task was viewed as work, the ends was viewed as more important than the means, and the students were less interested in continuing with it. Conversely, when it was viewed as play, the means was much more important, and students were more motivated to continue. In the realm of Cloud Foundry, there are a few options available for presenting new starters with play environments for them to investigate, learn, and be motivated to develop their own lines of inquiry. Need a Cloud Foundry environment? CFDev is a Cloud Foundry distribution that you can run locally on your workstation, and it gives new starters a place to experiment with deploying applications and exploring Cloud Foundry for the very first time. If you want to experiment with BOSH, and why wouldn't you? There's BOSH Lite. BOSH Lite provisions you with a BOSH director, which you can deploy locally on your machine. And it allows you to deploy BOSH releases as containers as opposed to VMs. This provides a lot of visibility into the process of deploying a BOSH director, as well as developing and testing BOSH releases. And with a BOSH Lite deployed, the world is your oyster, the world of BOSH deployments, that is. Learners are then able to deploy their own concourse environments or Cloud Foundry deployment environments on their local machine. They're free to break and mend and break and mend to their heart's content. And if it's possible within their organization, they can deploy any of these components on the IS that's available to them. Similar to self-efficacy, the ability to play has benefits that extend beyond introductory learning. Play can have a positive impact on team members, paving the way for greater innovation within the organization. It helps people to think more divergently and find unusual mental associations that are separate from the traditional approaches that exist within the organization. The use of play as a part of innovation is something that's been demonstrated in a world of different fields, including the pharmaceutical industry. Management and organization scholar Alexander Styhre looked at drug innovation through the lens of Roger Caillois' theory of play. Caillois set out 4 different types of game that are present in all societies. The agon, which is a type of game in which performance is key. These are games based on competition where some set of skills are put to the test. Most sports fall into this category. There's the alia, which is a type of game based on chance, where luck is what determines the victor. This would be a game like Snakes and Ladders. Mimicry is essentially a game of make-believe, where players take on some sort of role and act out simulations, like online role-play games. And finally, there's the ilnix, coming from the Greek word for vertigo. This refers to games that expose players to some sort of physical force and movement to elicit some sort of emotional response, like riding a roller coaster or spinning around until you fall over. The main components we're interested in here are the agon and the alia. Styhre carried out a case study of one of the top 5 drug companies at the time being 2005. Due to the nature of drug discovery research, it goes without saying that a core element of this work is skill. Researchers need to have knowledge of synthesis chemistry, biology, and pharmacology, and without these skills, the research couldn't be done. At the time of the study, the company in question was going through a period of transition where they were experiencing more management control and greater focus on the quantity of drug candidates as opposed to the quality. As a result, they had less time to explore specific scientific research questions. This was viewed as being in opposition to drug discovery as a whole. One senior scientist said, "Most of the greatest discoveries are random. The chances of exploiting serendipities are much lower now. That's a dilemma because you cannot say, I'm off to play in the lab for a while. I don't really know what to do, but the outcome may be something amazing. That would be too anti-industrial, but in fact, it often works that way." Similarly, another doctor said, "All of the interesting things I've published have been serendipities." The study suggests that scientific research is based on both the high skill of researchers and the element of chance that comes into play. Rather than assuming that scientific work operates along linear trajectories, the study suggests that advanced science-based research can be explored as being based on skill and chance, these ideas of the agon and the alia. And crucially, when the opportunities for this chance element are being stripped away, those in the field feel less able to do their jobs effectively. I haven't worked in the tech industry for a long time, and like so many industries, it has its own jargon that we all grow accustomed to. One word that always sticks out for me is onboarding, and the fact that it can vary from place to place. So naturally, I had to look it up myself to double check. For some, Onboarding is viewed as just the process of giving people access to the systems they'll eventually need to do their jobs. However, for onboarding to be effective, it needs to leave people thinking that they have the skills and knowledge to actually be able to do their jobs effectively. And for a Cloud Foundry platform team, this entails learning about a number of complex technologies and how they work together. So how can we do this effectively? We can dedicate time to creating learning materials for new starters to work through, ensuring that these gradually progress in complexity, but also giving people enough of a challenge to motivate them. We can ensure that new learners are given and know that they have time to develop their initial understanding. We can showcase the work of other team members so new team members can see what they could eventually do. We should provide realistic encouragement from the right sources to continuously motivate new starters. And we need to ensure that they have space and time to play in environments that they know will not be disruptive to the wider team. Like a lot of practices and approaches that are introduced to support a core set of people, these stand to benefit anyone. Much like new team members, existing ones also benefit from high self-efficacy and the scope to play, helping deliver value and innovation to the business. You can find the references to the research that I mentioned throughout the presentation at this link here, and I'll be to the side of the stage if you have any questions or want to discuss anything in further detail. Thank you.